"Look at this one," the man in the white blazer said, loud enough for the whole marquee to hear. "A landlubber. Plant him on a deck for 10 minutes and he'd be green over the rail, metals and all." He laughed, and the people around him laughed because he was famous and they wanted to be near it. "Stand still all you like, soldier. The sea would teach you what still really means." I did not move. That is my whole trade, the not moving, and I had stood through worse than a yachtsman's wit. But behind the face that gave him nothing, I will tell you exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking that I had once stood still on a deck that climbed a wall of black water taller than the marquee around me, that I had held a wheel through a night the sea spent trying to take a boat full of strangers, and that the man calling me a landlubber had no idea he was talking to the steadiest pair of hands that ever rode out the Mevra race. I did not tell him. A guard does not explain himself to the storm. He lets the storm wear itself out. My name is Edrin Voss, and on the evening this happened I was posted inside the long marquee on the south lawn of Havern House, at the King's Maritime Relief Gala, a charity night for the families of lost crews, held every year on the lawn that runs down to the river Stair. I had stood that post for 3 seasons. I knew the slope of the ground under the canvas, the way the river smell came up through the matting at low water, the exact angle of the bunting that the rigging crew never quite got level. I knew the gala the way a man knows a tide table. What I did not know, walking on that night, was that the guest of honor would decide to make a sport of me. His name was Castor Bren, and he was the most photographed sailor alive. He had won the trophies men frame and the ones men only dream about, crossed oceans on boats that cost more than the houses the gala was raising money to keep, and he wore all of it like a second skin. He had been flown in to lend his face to the relief fund, and he had arrived already certain that the evening was about him. I watched him work the room from the corner of my eye, a handshake here, a photograph there, a laugh placed exactly where it would carry. A showman. There is nothing wrong with a showman. The trouble starts when a showman runs short of an audience and goes looking for one. He found me near the end of the first hour, when the speeches had not yet started, and the champagne had loosened the crowd into clusters. He stopped in front of my post with 3 or 4 of his hangers on, swirled his glass, and looked me up and down the way you'd appraise a mast for rot. "You know," he said to them more than to me, "they put these fellows out like furniture, polished, useless if the weather turns." He leaned in, close enough that I could smell the salt and cedar of whatever he wore. "Have you ever been on the water, statue? Real water? Or is the deepest you've been the puddle on this lawn?" I gave him the regulation distance, the 1,000-yard line over his shoulder and nothing else. The bearskin sat its familiar weight on my brow. My gloves were white and still on the rifle. Inside, where no one could see, something old turned over once, the way a hull groans when a swell passes under it. I knew real water. I had known it the way a man knows a thing that has tried to kill him and failed. But I had learned a long time ago that the men who ask whether you've been tested are almost never the men who have, and that the steadiest answer to noise is silence. "Nothing," Bren announced, delighted, "not a flicker." "He's been wound up and left running." He turned to his audience. "I'll tell you what stillness is. Stillness is 40 knots of wind and a deck you can't stand on and the discipline to hold your line anyway. That's stillness. This," he waved his glass at me, "is a man standing on grass." A young woman near him laughed too quickly and then looked guilty about it. A waiter slowed to watch and then hurried on. I felt the attention gather the way water gathers before it breaks, and I held my line because that is what you do. You do not chase the wave. You meet it and you let it pass. Here is the thing about a man like Bren, and I had met his kind on the water years before the marquee. The sea makes some men humble and some men loud, and the loud ones are the ones who have only ever had the sea behave for them. He had ridden good boats in fair seasons with the best cruise money could buy. He had never been handed a night that did not care who he was. I had. And I knew, standing there with my eyes forward and my mouth shut, that one of us in that marquee had actually held a line when holding it was the only thing between living people and the cold. And it was not the man in the white blazer. He was not finished. Men like that are never finished while the room is still looking. "Come on," he said, stepping a half-pace closer, lowering his voice to the tone men use when they want everyone to lean in. "Give us something. One word. Tell me you felt a swell under you and I'll buy a whole table for these grieving families myself. One word, landlubber," he smiled. "No, then stand there and let the real sailors do the work." That last word, sailors, landed somewhere under my breastbone, in a place I had bolted shut years before and did not open at charity galas. I thought of a name I do not say lightly. I thought of the wheel kicking in my hands and a voice in my ear counting souls. I thought of a man I had failed to bring home and the 11 I had. None of it showed. The training is good for that. It is good for exactly that. But I will not pretend the word did not land. It did. I simply did not give it back to him. Bren mistook my stillness for the thing he had named it: emptiness, furniture, a man with nothing inside the uniform. He clapped one of his friends on the shoulder, laughed his carrying laugh, and moved off toward the stage, satisfied that he had owned the room and the statue both. I watched the back of his white blazer go and let my breath out slow through my nose, the way you do when a squall passes and you can finally ease the wheel. I thought that was the end of it. A guard learns to let these things wash off. By morning it would be one more piece of weather I had stood through. I was wrong about that. Because the King's Maritime Relief Gala was not only champagne and speeches. It had, that year, a centerpiece that no one had warned me about. And before the night was over, the sea was going to walk into that marquee in a way none of us expected. And it was going to ask, of every famous sailor in the room, the one question their trophies could not answer. But I am getting ahead of the tide. Let me take you back to the lawn and the bunting that hung crooked, and the moment the speeches began, because that was when the evening stopped being about a yachtsman's jokes and started being about something I had spent a decade trying not to remember. The gala host that year was an old woman the household called the Keeper of the Relief, a title that meant she had buried more sailors than she could count and spent the rest of her life raising the money their families needed afterward. She took the small stage at the head of the marquee, tapped the microphone once, and the room came around to her the way a fleet comes around to a flagship. She did not have Bren's polish. She had something better. She had the room's respect, freely given, and she did not waste a word. "Most of you," she said, "know this night for the champagne and the famous faces." A soft, knowing laugh moved through the crowd, and Bren, near the front, raised his glass to himself. But the relief fund does not exist for famous faces. It exists for the families of crews who went out on a working sea and did not come back. And every year we set aside one part of this evening to remember a single rescue, not to celebrate it, but to remind ourselves what these waters cost and what they sometimes spare. I straightened a fraction at my post, not enough for anyone to notice, just enough that my own heart felt it. "This year," the keeper went on, "we remember the Mevera race. I have stood my post through cannon and choirs and a queen's funeral, and I did not move when she said it. But I will tell you that the marquee went very far away for a moment, and the matting under my boots became, for one breath, a deck. The Mevera race, 10 years gone, near enough. A pleasure flotilla caught between the headlands when a storm came up faster than any forecast had any right to allow, a wall of weather that turned a regatta into a graveyard in under 2 hours. I do not need the keeper to tell me what it cost. I was there. I was 26 years old and a coxswain in the inshore rescue service, and on the night of the Mevera race, I took a small open boat out 4 times into seas that the harbor master had already declared unsurvivable, and I came back 3 of those 4 times with people in the bottom of the boat who would otherwise have been names on a wall. 41 souls were lost that night, the keeper said, and the marquee was silent now in a way it had not been for Bren. And 31 were saved by the men and women of the inshore boats, who went out when the lifeboats themselves were ordered to stand off because the harbor mouth was closing. One coxswain in particular brought in 3 boatloads through a gap no one believed could be threaded and went back for a 4th when his own crew begged him not to. She paused. We have never been able to honor him in person. He left the service not long after and asked, very firmly, never to be named. We respect that. But tonight, 10 years on, the families he saved are in this room, and they wished, for once, to say thank you to the storm and everyone who rode it. I kept my eyes forward, 31. The number had a weight I carried in a specific place, just under the right collarbone where the wheel had cracked a rib that 4th time out. 31 home, and 1 not. I did not let my face know any of it. The bearskin is good for that. The gloves are good for that. A guard's stillness is not emptiness, whatever Bren thought. It is a lid screwed down hard over a great deal of weather. What I had not expected was Bren. He did not stay quiet. A man who needs the room cannot bear to lose it, even to the dead. He waited until the keeper stepped back, until the applause for the saved families began, and then he did the thing that I think, in the end, decided how the rest of the night would go. He stepped up onto the edge of the small stage, uninvited, glass still in hand, and he turned the moment back toward himself. A beautiful story, he said, warm and large, and a worthy one, the Mevera. I know those waters well, I've raced them many times. He had not. The Mevera headlands are no race course. They are a working channel, and no trophy regatta has run them in living memory. But he said it with such ease that half the room believed him. And I'll tell you, as a man who has spent his life on the sea, that the difference between living and dying out there is one thing: nerve. The nerve to hold your line when everything in you says run. Some men have it. He let his eyes travel, deliberate, to my post at the side of the marquee, and the corner of his mouth lifted. And some men only stand still on a lawn. He thought it was a clever turn. He thought he was tying the brave coxswain to himself and the joke to me in one neat knot, the famous sailor honoring the famous rescue while putting the toy soldier in his place. I felt the eyes come to me again, amused, expectant, waiting for the statue to give them nothing as the statue always did. And I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me, because the not moving was real, but it was not easy. For 10 years I had kept the Mevera in a locked compartment below the waterline, the way you stow anything that would sink you if it got loose. I had left the service because I could not stop counting the one I lost. I had taken a quieter trade, discipline, ceremony, a post where the worst that could happen was a tourist's rudeness, precisely so that I would never again be the man with people's lives in his hands. And now a stranger in a white blazer was standing on a stage telling a room full of the families I had carried that nerve was a thing you wore to galas, and using my silence as his punchline. I did not move, but I made a decision in that breath, the kind you make once and do not unmake. I decided that I would not let him have the Mevera. He could have his jokes about me. I had stood through worse and would stand through more. But the storm was not his to dress up and parade. The 31 were not his, and the one I lost was very much not his. I did not yet know how I would keep it from him. I only knew, with the cold certainty I used to feel reaching for the throttle, that the tide had turned in that marquee, and that for the first time in 3 seasons I was no longer entirely a guard. Because 2 of the saved families had come forward to the front of the stage, and one of them, an older man with a weathered face and a daughter at his elbow, was not looking at Bren at all. He was looking at me. His name, I would learn later, was Halden Rowe. 10 years before he had been a passenger on a small ferry launch caught off the headlands, one of 19 aboard a vessel built for half that. I had taken 8 of them off her gunwale before she rolled. He had been the last, and the only one I could not reach without going over the side myself with a line around my waist while my crewman braced against the thwart and screamed at me that we would both drown. I had gone over anyway. I remembered the cold of it more than anything, a cold that did not feel like temperature so much as a hand closing. I remembered his grip on my forearm, the only thing either of us had. I had not seen his face in 10 years. I had spent 10 years trying not to. He saw it now. I do not know what gave me away. The eyes, perhaps. A coxswain does not forget a face he has pulled out of the water, and I suppose it works the other way too. He stood very still, stiller, I thought, than even I was managing, and his daughter, feeling him stop, followed his line of sight to me. She did not understand it yet. He did. On the stage, Bren was still talking. He had moved on to a story about a crossing of his, the kind of story that ends with the teller alive and admired, and the room was politely letting him have it because he was famous, and it was easier than not. I let his words run past me like water past a hull. My attention was on Halden Rowe, and on the thing I could see building in his weathered face, recognition turning into certainty, certainty turning into something that needed to be said out loud. Don't, I wanted to tell him. I had asked 10 years before never to be named. I had meant it. I did not want the thanks. The thanks was the heaviest thing of all because every grateful face carried behind it, the one face I had not been able to make grateful. But a guard does not speak from his post, and a guard certainly does not call out across a charity gala, so I held my line and I let it come, whatever it was. It came quietly. Halden Rowe did not shout. He turned to his daughter and said something low, and she went pale and looked at me with her hand at her mouth, and then the two of them stepped not toward Bren and his microphone, but toward the side of the marquee, toward my post. The crowd nearest them noticed the small movement and turned with it, the way a flock turns on a single bird. By the time the old man reached the rope line a few feet from where I stood, a good portion of the room had quieted to see what the saved family was doing wandering away from the stage. He stopped at the rope. He looked up at me. I have a head and a bearskin on most men, and he was not tall, and his eyes were wet and steady at once, the way a man's eyes get when he has waited a long time to say a thing. "It's you," he said, not loud, but the marquee had gone quiet enough that it carried. "I'd know you in the dark. God knows I have every night for 10 years. His voice shook and held. "You came over the side for me. You had a wife waiting, you told me, in the boat to keep me talking. You said you had someone waiting, and so did I, and we were both going home. You went over the side of that boat into the Mevera for a man you'd never met." I did not move. I want that understood. I held my post and my line and my eyes forward, because that is the discipline, and the discipline is not a costume. It is the spine of the thing. But I will tell you that holding it in that moment cost me more than the bearskin's weight and the long hours and every rude tourist of 3 seasons put together. Because the old man was not wrong, and the whole room had just heard it, and standing 8 feet away with his glass frozen halfway to his mouth was Castor Bren, who had spent the evening calling me a landlubber. Bren recovered the way showmen do. He laughed a short, uncertain sound. "Now that's a touching mix-up," he said, stepping down off the stage edge, moving to reclaim the room. "But I think the gentleman's overcome. These ceremonies stir up a lot of feeling. I'm sure this fine soldier has never been anywhere near the Mevera. Look at him, he's a palace ornament, not a—" "I was the harbor master's clerk that night," said another voice. It came from a man near the back of the marquee, middle-aged, stout, in a plain dark suit among all the finery, the kind of man you do not look at twice until he speaks. He stepped forward. "I logged the boats. I logged them all. The lifeboats stood off when the harbor mouth closed. Those were the orders, and they were right orders. No man could fault them. But there was one inshore coxswain who would not stand off. He was looking at me now too, and I felt the floor of the marquee tilt under me, though it did not move at all. 4 launches he made. We logged 3 returns with souls aboard and one that we thought we'd lost, until he came back the 4th time, half drowned, with a man pulled off a rolling launch by a line around his own waist. We never got his name. He wouldn't give it. The chief tried to put him up for the Mariner's Cross, and he refused it to our faces and walked out into the rain. The clerk's voice was perfectly level. I have wondered for 10 years what became of him. I did not expect to find him guarding a tent. The marquis was silent now, in earnest. Not the silence of a room waiting for a punchline. The other kind. The kind a sea goes when the wind drops all at once and you know, in your bones, that the worst of it has only paused. I kept my eyes forward, but the lid I had screwed down 10 years ago was lifting at the edges, and there was nothing I could do about it without breaking a discipline I was not willing to break even now. Bren's mouth had stopped moving. He looked at the clerk and at the old man at the rope, and at the daughter with her hand still over her mouth, and then slowly, the way a man looks at a chart and realizes he has been reading it upside down, he looked at me. Really looked for the first time all evening, not at the costume, at the man inside it. You, he said, it was barely a word. And I understood that the storm had walked into the marquee, exactly as I'd felt it would, and that it had not come for the families or the fund or the keeper at her microphone. It had come, in the end, for the one man in the room who had spent his whole life telling everyone what the sea was, and had never once been asked to prove it. The keeper of the relief was not a woman who let a moment go to waste, and she did not let this one. She came down off her stage with a slowness that was its own kind of authority, crossed the matting, and stopped a few feet from me. She did not crowd the rope. She simply looked at me with an expression I had seen before only on the faces of people who had spent a long time around the sea, a recognition that did not need confirming. "Is it true?" she asked, quiet for me though the room heard it. "I have a rule about my post, and the rule is that I do not speak from it. 3 seasons I had kept that rule against tourists and drunks, and a foreign officer who once ordered me to salute. But the keeper of the relief was not a tourist, and the families of the Mevra had asked, this once, to say their thanks, and I found that I could not stand on ceremony while an old man I had carried out of the cold wept 8 feet away, because no one would simply confirm what he knew to be true. There is a discipline higher than the regulation, and that night it asked something of me. So I broke my own rule, for the first time in 3 seasons and the last time I ever would. "Yes," I said. One word. The same one Bren had demanded of me all evening and not gotten. The Marquis took it like a held breath let go. "The Mariner's Cross," the keeper said. "You refused it." "I didn't earn a cross," I said, and my voice came out lower and rougher than I remembered it. Eyes forward still, that much I would not surrender. "I earned 31 home and one I couldn't reach. A cross is for the 31. The one is mine to carry. I didn't want a ribbon making it look settled when it isn't." I felt Halden Rowe make a sound at the rope and his daughter put her arm around him. I did not look. I could not look, not and keep my line. The keeper was quiet for a moment. Then she said, gently, the thing that came nearest to undoing me of anything said that night. "The one you couldn't reach. We know his name. He's on our wall. And every year his mother comes to this gala, and every year she has said the same thing to me, that whoever the coxswain was, she did not blame him because he went back when the lifeboats couldn't and he went over the side, and a man who does that does not owe the sea an apology." She paused. "She is here tonight. She has been watching you this whole time. She knew before any of us." I do not know how a man holds his post when something like that is said to him. I will tell you only that I did, that my eyes stayed forward and my glove stayed still on the rifle, and that the matting under my boots was wet by the end of it, though no one would ever have known from my face. The bearskin is good for that. It hides a great deal of weather. And through all of it, the old man, the clerk, the keeper, the name on the wall, Castor Bren stood frozen at the center of the marquee in his white blazer, holding a glass he had forgotten, while the room he had owned all evening turned its back on him without a single person needing to be unkind. That was the thing. No one humiliated him. No one had to. The room simply stopped looking at the man who talked about the sea and started looking at the man who had ridden it. And the distance between those two things had never in his life been laid out so plainly in front of him. He set his glass down. I saw him do it out of the edge of my vision, a careful, deliberate gesture, a man putting down the prop he had been performing with all night because he understood at last that the performance was over. He crossed the matting toward me. The crowd parted for him, but not warmly. He stopped at the rope beside Halden Row, and for a long moment the famous yachtsman and the rescued passenger stood shoulder to shoulder looking up at a palace guard, and I think Bren understood in that moment the exact size of what he had said earlier and to whom. "I called you a landlubber," he said, not loud. The room heard it anyway. To his credit, and I will give him this, because a man who eats his words in front of a crowd has more spine than a man who slinks off, he did not whisper it. I stood in front of a room of grieving families and I made jokes about nerve, and I made them at you. His jaw worked. I have crossed every ocean there is. I have never once gone over the side of a boat into a sea that was trying to kill me for a stranger, with my crew begging me not to. I have never had to. I have spent my whole career being applauded for surviving seas I chose. He swallowed. And I spent tonight calling the bravest man in this marquee a piece of furniture. I said nothing. I had broken my rule once for the keeper and the dead. I would not break it again for Bren, and he had not asked me to. Some things a man has to say into a silence and let stand. The silence is part of the price. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm ashamed. And I'd like to do something about it if these families will let me." He turned to the keeper. "You said one word from a sailor would buy a table for these families. I said that. I meant it as a joke at his expense." He had the grace to look at me when he said it. "He gave you the word. I'll honor it 100 times over. Whatever the relief fund needs this year and next year and the year after, it's done. Not for my name. Take my name off it entirely." "Do it in his, except he won't give you his name, will he?" A short, broken laugh. "Of course he won't. So do it for the one he couldn't reach. Put it under that name. That's the only one that matters in this room." The keeper looked at him for a long moment, measuring, the way she measured everything. Then she nodded once. "We'll do that," she said, "under that name." And the old woman near the back of the marquee, the mother who had been watching me the whole time, who had known before any of them, began, very quietly, to cry. Not the hard crying of grief. The other kind. The kind that comes when something you have carried for 10 years is finally, gently, set down beside you by people who understand its weight. I held my post, but I will tell you that I have stood through cannon and choirs and a queen's funeral, and I have never stood through anything harder than that, and I have never been prouder to be a man who does not move. The gala went on, because that is what galas do. The keeper returned to her stage and steered the room with a few sure words back toward the business of the evening, and the clusters reformed and the champagne went round again. But it was a different room now. The famous faces had gone quiet and watchful. Bren did not work the room any further. He stood near the back the rest of the night, talking low with the clerk who had logged the boats, asking questions, I think, that he should have asked a long time ago. Once I saw him write something on a card and hand it to the keeper, and from the way she folded it carefully into her glove, I understood that whatever number was on it was a serious one. He never came near my post again. But twice I caught him looking over, and there was no mockery left in it. There was something closer to the look the old harbor master had given me 10 years ago, when I refused the cross and walked out into the rain. The look of a man trying to understand a thing he has no compartment for. Near the end of the night, after the speeches were done and the marquee had thinned, the mother came to me. I had been dreading it all evening, if I am honest. The thanks of the saved is heavy, but the grief of the lost is the heaviest thing the sea ever hands a rescuer, and I had spent 10 years arranging my whole life so that I would never have to hold it. She was a small woman, gray, with the kind of stillness in her that I recognized because it was the same stillness I had built into myself, a lid screwed down over a great deal of weather. She came to the rope and stood there, and for a while she did not say anything at all. Neither did I. Two people who have learned to be still do not always need to fill the quiet. Then she said, "You went back a 4th time." "Yes," I said, "the second and last time I ever spoke from my post. For my boy." I couldn't reach him. My voice did not want to work, but I made it. The launch went over before I came alongside. I had a man on the line already and a swell took us off, and by the time I came around, I stopped, eyes forward. I came around 3 times more after that in the dark until my crew pulled me off the wheel by force. I want you to know I didn't stop because I gave up. I stopped because they made me. I have never forgiven the sea for that, and I have never quite forgiven myself. She was quiet again. Then she reached up slowly so that I could have stopped her if regulation had demanded it, and I let her, and she laid one small dry hand on the white glove that held my rifle. The only time in 3 seasons another soul touched me at my post. He was a strong swimmer, she said. He'd have wanted you to take the man on the line. He'd have told you to. I've had 10 years to know that, and I do know it. Her eyes were wet and perfectly steady. I didn't come here tonight to forgive you because there was never anything to forgive. I came to tell you to put it down. You've carried my son for 10 years as if he were yours to carry. He isn't. He's mine. Give him back to me now. You've more than earned the rest. I do not have words for what that did. I'm not sure there are words for it. I only know that something I had been holding under the waterline for 10 years with both hands every day came loose, not all at once, not like a flood, but the way a line finally surrenders when the strain comes off it. I kept my eyes forward. I kept my post, but I let it go. There in the marquee with her hand on my glove, I finally let the boy go home to his mother where he had always belonged. Thank you, I said. The last words I spoke from that post and the truest. She patted the glove once, the way you'd settle a horse, and she walked away into the thinning crowd, and I stood my post, and the gala ended, and the lawn emptied down to the river stair, and the bunting hung crooked over an empty marquee the way it always had. I served 3 more seasons after that night, and then I retired quietly the way I do everything. I never sought out the relief fund, and I never told the story. The people who needed to know it already did, and the rest did not need it. But I heard, the way you hear things, that the Maritime Relief Gala raised more that year than it ever had, and that a certain famous yachtsman quietly funds a school for inshore rescue coxswains now, the real ones, the ones who go out on working seas when the lifeboats are ordered to stand off, and that he teaches there himself some weekends, without cameras. And that he has never once mentioned the night a palace guard he called a landlubber turned out to be the man on the wall they'd been trying to thank for 10 years. I'm told he's good with the young coxswains. I'm told he tells them that nerve is not the thing they think it is. That nerve is going over the side for a stranger when every sensible part of you says don't. And that he met a man once who taught him the difference between surviving a sea and answering to one. I take that as his apology, paid in full, in the only currency that ever mattered out there. People ask me sometimes, the few who know, whether it galled me, standing there all evening taking a famous man's jokes when I could have stopped him with a single sentence about the Mevera. It didn't. A guard's whole craft is knowing that the loudest man in the room is almost never the one to fear, and that stillness is not weakness waiting to be exposed. It is strength that has already been tested and has nothing left to prove. Bren had spent his life performing nerve for crowds. I had spent one night using mine where it counted, 10 years before in the dark, where no crowd would ever see, and that was the whole difference between us. And it was a difference no white blazer and no trophy and no microphone could ever close. So I let him talk. I let the storm wear itself out, the way I always have. Because I learned a long time ago, on a night the sea spent trying to take a boat full of strangers, that the man who holds his line in silence, who does not chase the wave, who does not need the room to know what he is the only kind of man you want at the wheel when the harbor mouth is closing. I never did outsail anyone. I never raced a day in my life. I just went out 4 times into a sea that had already killed 41 people and came back 3. That has always been enough stillness for me.